Hello, welcome back to Rev Endurance Sports and another edition of What is in Our Stand today. That's a hashtag you can follow across all my social media for Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and also on YouTube. Well, today I've got a repeat customer who brought me his mountain bike because he was having rear brake failure 15-20 minutes into a ride. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because when he brought me the bike, I would squeeze on the lever and it had good action. It had really good travel as far as not going all the way to the bar. But what he told me was that about 15-20 minutes into the ride, he would have lessening, the performance would lessen, and then the brake lever would come closer and closer to the bar till eventually it would just fail and not have much power. So then, just like any medical visit to a doctor, you have to go through a little bit of history with the customer about the bike. Okay, how long have you owned the bike? And he said about 9 months. And I said, okay, well, do you know the history of the bike? Because he bought it used. And he says, well, no, I don't. And I said, well, generally speaking, you should do a brake bleed once a year. Now, that'll also depend on how much you ride. And the reason why that's important is because the heat cycles of that fluid, the more you ride and the more intensely you ride, the more you heat up that fluid, cool it down, heat, cool. And if you understand how a hydraulic disc brake system works, you have your calipers and you have your rotor. And whenever you squeeze the brake lever, your caliper will squeeze on the rotor. The rotor then, with that friction, will heat up. And when that heats up, it heats up the pads, and then the pads heat up the pistons, and then the pistons heat up the fluid inside the system, right? So it all basically starts off with you squeezing on the lever. The caliper will close around the rotor, and that rotor heats up and then transfers all that heat through the rest of the system. So remember, the cyclical nature of braking and not braking is you heat up the fluid, you cool it down, you heat up the fluid, cool it down. So multiple hour ride, multiple rides over a year's time frame, we recommend that you bleed the system. At least bleed it. You might even have to flush out everything. And so that takes us to where we are now, because I started this brake bleed and I was just going to go through it, and I noticed that some darker fluid was coming out. So I said, well, you know what, let's just stop right here, even though I'm in process, and see if I can queue up a video to show you how bad fluid can look through a system. And that was my initial thought when the customer said, 15 to 20 minutes in, it's losing its performance. I'm thinking, okay, that fluid is contaminated because it's losing its efficacy in a short period of time during a bike ride. And then later, or another day when he goes back out, it's working fine again for the first 15 to 20 minutes. So this leads me to believe the fluid can no longer be effective because it's contaminated and it can't handle the heat. All right, so there's going to be a rough transition, and we're going to move over to the bleeding process that I've already started. So here we go. All right, so just to show you what I've done to set this up, we've got the brake bleed block in here, and we've got the bleed port right here, and that bleed port has a nut right there. In this case, it's 7mm, and here is our syringe with hydraulic fluid, or I should say mineral oil, for this hydraulic brake system. Now, it's very important that you look at this color because that is what it's supposed to look like before it gets introduced into the rest of the brake system. Okay, so this nut here, you will loosen and then push the plunger on the syringe right here. Okay, now this fluid, if you follow this line, will then go up, and then here is our brake lever. And spoiler alert, we've already got some dark fluid in there, but we're going to show it live and in action. So you put the funnel up here, and one little trick that I always do to make sure that the lever goes back to where the customer had it. Right now I've got the lever horizontal to the ground, but before I moved it, see this gray Sharpie mark right here? I will align the bar Sharpie mark with the clamp Sharpie mark, and then I will have it right in the same position the customer had it when he brought the bike in. Okay, so like I said, right now this is horizontal. You want your bleed port, or your funnel in this case, to be higher than your brake caliper. All right, so when we do this, the important thing is that you have to have your camera in the funnel. So this will be interesting because, oh, and by the way, this here is what is typical to clamp down onto your bleed port. But I like this little black fitting instead, because then that gives me enough play here to use a wrench, and this is not in my way. Okay, so what we're going to do now, and this might be difficult, but we'll try, is to open this bleed port, and maybe that syringe might fall and this whole video will be null and void, and we may have to start over. All right, so excuse me while I drop the wrench. These are not highly professional videos. These are just me. Okay, so now you turn your syringe upright like this, so that if there's any air bubbles in the line, they will end up at the top of your syringe. Then you open up your plunger or your plug here. Like I said, we've already got fluid in here, but watch when I squeeze the plunger, what's going to happen in here. So you see all that fluid? It's just getting darker and darker and darker. And even though I'm putting fresh, beautiful pink fluid in there, what you're getting is dark fluid coming through the system. So this, now you can see the cup is quite full. This is not good. So we're going to flush the rest of this fluid out. May take a couple of passes, and then with clean fluid constantly pushing through, we should be back to a nice pink fluid like this. Okay, well, that's all for today. I appreciate your time, your attention. Please subscribe to the channel so that you can see more of these videos of actual service taking place. All right, thank you so much, and we'll see you up the road.